Welcome to Unexpected Points from an undisclosed location on the west coast of the United States, San Clemente, California, to be specific, in my undisclosed location. A little bit of a unique setup here. I'm in a hotel, not great Wi-Fi. I'm gonna try to upload this video, but we're not gonna do the live stream because of that situation, and also make it difficult to do an interview or to pipe in Herms Meyer on here to give us his uninformed preseason takes. So it's just going to be me, but I have done some research, some pretty good research here on quarterback performances specifically in week 2 here of the preseason after going through the stuff that happened last week. And maybe I'll just start with a little bit of an overarching sort of point here. And that is that the grading for these quarterbacks so far this year, and I think it aligns with how well they've played so far this year, it's been pretty good. I mean, these guys are looking really, really, really good. And if we go back, I'm talking specifically about the rookies here, but also some of the second-year players. And if we go back to some of the research that I highlighted last week that I've done on quarterback mattering performance in the preseason for the small samples that we do have. When I looked in the past at PFF grading in the preseason versus PFF grading in the regular season for rookies who beginning in 2006 is as far back as the PFF data goes that there is some correlation, especially at the high end, for guys who play well, extremely well during the preseason and how well they end up playing during the regular season. Now, it's not always the case. I mean, for every Dak Prescott who has a fantastical rookie preseason, and then has a fantastical rookie season, sometimes it is or is not the case for the others, like maybe a Blake Bortles, let's say, who had a similar sort of situation. But if we're looking at the guys this year, and let me just dial in on, again, we're going to start the overarching stuff, and then we'll get a little bit further into this. If you're looking at just guys who are drafted this year, who have at least 15 dropbacks so far in the preseason, and we look at their passing grades so far, JJ McCarthy has an 84 passing grade. RIP, JJ, but he did do really well in his one game there. Bo Nix, 78.4. Now, it isn't the most impressive number, but if you calculate into the fact that for an entire regular season, the average-ish sort of number for a quarterback in the NFL for their passing number is, I don't know, somewhere between 65 and 70. And then for a rookie, it's a little bit lower than that. So pretty good. Bo Nix at 78.4. Jaden Daniels, 78. Drake May, 76.9. And then somewhat surprisingly, if you've just been paying attention to what's going on social media and on Twitter and other things, Caleb Williams down at 65.7%, but still a pretty solid number. And if you want to go to Michael Penix, also, we don't have a lot of sample with him. We just have the 16 dropbacks, but a 62.6. So again, not too bad. All these highly drafted quarterbacks are performing pretty well during the preseason. And as I was indicating before, that is not necessarily the case in prior years. I mean, for instance, if you look at last year, CJ Stroud was at 66.4. So he was okay. But below, he would have been, mid-tier-ish for this year. And Bryce Young was a 59.4. Anthony Richardson was a 48 passing grade in the regular season. Will Levis was a 48.3. I'm sorry, in the regular season. Sorry, in the preseason, 48.3 in the preseason. So, again, not looking so hot. If we go back let's go back to 2021. We'll just pretend the 2022 class doesn't exist. During that preseason, Mac Jones, a 92.2. So outstanding grade during the preseason. Maybe you could say that was a little bit of a false flag symbol there, some noise that we're talking about there. But he did have also an excellent rookie season. Zach Wilson was 83.9. Trevor Lawrence was 75.7. Justin Fields down in the 60s. So that's also a pretty good class. Pretty good class that year. Trey Lance, 53.6. And if we go all the way back to 2020 now, as we've seen all of these guys get big contracts from this class, well, unfortunately, we don't have a preseason for them. So we can't quite use them because of the COVID lack of preseason there. But let's dig into each one of these rookies specifically. I'm also going to talk about some of the quarterback battles which have now been decided, what I think about those. I guess there hasn't been a lot that's been decided other than the fact that Gardner Minshew is going to be starting for the Raiders and that they officially announced that Jaden Daniels is going to be the starter for the Commanders, but I think we kind of already knew that. Okay, let's start with Gardner Minshew being named QB1. I mean, he's been okay during the preseason. Again, my research shows you that for non-rookies, so that would also Aiden O'Connell would fit into this bucket, that it doesn't really matter that much what happened in the preseason. And I don't really like the pick though. And if you, again, I have some research on the website on unexpectedpoints.substack.com talking about our best projections for these guys going forward. And Aiden O'Connell had a rough, kind of below average-ish sort of year from an EPA per play perspective, but he was really good in his grading. So the truth probably lies somewhere between those two last season. In this preseason, I think what may have been the nail in the coffin for him was that he threw this 65-plus yard pick six in the last game where, it was a late throw over the middle. Somewhat bad luck. The receiver his hands were there at the same time, but it was a bad throw. I mean, it was a bad throw. There's no doubt about it. So I think when we're talking about Antonio Pierce, we're talking about an offense that they think they're just going to run the ball a ton and be able to play great defense and institute the Mahomes rule and win games in that sort of fashion. I could see why Minshew is the choice there. For me, though, when you're talking about a team that's not competing realistically at all for the playoffs, I feel like it could have been a better choice to go with the unknown quantity, and then you could always go back to Minshew. I mean, Minshew is a solid, above average backup sort of quarterback in the NFL. You can always go back to him. That's what I would have done rather than now if you're going back and forth, they're in the situation, any chance that Aiden O'Connell ends up being a good quarterback, which is fairly small, let's face it, for a guy who's a day three, second-year quarterback, might be out the window. So don't quite agree with that situation, but I get it. They're trying to be conservative. Now, in a similar vein, but in a way that makes much more sense to me, is the fact that the Steelers now, with this choice between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, I guess there's some possibility that they go with Fields. The offense was a little bit more functional, I guess, as far as being able to move the ball with Fields in his time in the second preseason game. Wasn't very functional in the first preseason game with Fields, but somewhat functional in the second preseason game versus for Wilson. They didn't really move the ball at all. They did miss a field goal, so they moved down the field a little bit on one sort of play. But the thing is here, and this is the overarching thing with the Fields-Wilson discussion, in a similar way that I was talking about with the Raiders and why they might want to be conservative here, is the Steelers actually have a chance of making the playoffs. I don't know if they have a great chance of making the playoffs, but they actually have some sort of chance of making the playoffs. And if you think about in that sort of way, then going with a conservative option, which will not turn the ball over. And again, Fields had a couple of turnover-worthy plays in this game. He had really kind of an ugly-looking play where he brought the ball back. It got stripped. The ball flew up in the air. He caught it again. He threw it. It got tipped. It was just kind of a comical sort of play. He had another one where he actually made one of his biggest value-added completions of the game on a third down the sideline, which literally tipped off of the hands of a defensive back who could have made a better play on there. So it's those sorts of things where even if Fields brings the rushing ability, and he did in this game, maybe a little bit too much though. I mean, you're scrambling 5 times when you're only dropping back about 20 times. That's a lot of scrambles, and then additional 3 designed runs, including a horrible choice to keep the ball in a read option on 4th down, where he got knocked back for multiple yards. But I do think his rushing ability frees up the rest of the running game. They ran the ball pretty effectively outside of that. But for this sort of team, I mean, the Steelers are basically about, I don't know, 33% chance to make the playoffs, 30% chance to make the playoffs. So that is significant enough for them to say, okay, we're going to take the less downside with Russell Wilson. He did get sacked 3 times in this game, but all of those sacks were pretty quick sacks. It wasn't like he was holding the ball and running around a lot. His time to throw was well under 3 seconds, whereas Fields, it's up around 4 seconds on these plays because he's moving around and running around so much. He almost completed a 35, 40-yard pass down the sideline to George Pickens, which was reviewed, but then determined that he didn't quite get the second toe down there. So a moon ball down the sideline. I could see them continuing to do that sort of thing when it comes to that. Will be like the upside in the offense. Run the ball, play good defense, throw a few moon balls up to Pickens. Don't turn over the ball. Take some sacks, be a little bit conservative. Russell Wilson was checking down left and right on 3rd downs rather than pushing the ball down the field. But that's probably a little bit better than like not having a functional offense with Fields that also might turn over the ball, which is going to kill Tomlin when he looks at things like that happening. So it hasn't been officially announced that I'm aware of, at least at the time of this taping. But I still think it's going to be Wilson there, even if neither one of them looked very good at all. I mean, Fields in this last game, again, 5 scrambles on 17 dropbacks, plus 3 designed runs. I mean, you can make an offense out of that. Can you make a 17-game offense out of that? I'm not certain. 4.3 seconds in his average time to throw. Just tremendously fast. Now he was the slowest time to throw in the league last year at around 3.4 seconds. Almost a second longer than that is what was happening in this game. Yeah, if you look at their time to throw when we take screen passes out of the situation, Fields 4 seconds, Wilson 2.7 seconds. It's like they're kind of running a different thing. Maybe Wilson's being too conservative, but that might be also part of what they want there. So we'll see what the situation is with the Steelers, who they end up choosing. I think it's Wilson, and then you can always flip back to Fields too. Like if you go Fields first, Wilson's probably not going to be very happy about it as a Hall of Fame type of level player going forward. It makes things a little complicated going back and forth. Because I do think you make the move eventually going to Wilson no matter what if you start Fields. So start with Wilson. If you have to, in desperation times, goes to Fields later on. But I don't think it's going to be much of a life jacket. I don't think it's going to save a Steelers season that's going down if you go to Fields anyway. All right, let's go to Caleb Williams. Let's go to the rookies here, since this is a little bit more interesting. So for Williams, I'm not putting him on quite this status, but his preseason, there's probably a bit of a dichotomy between those who watched it and tried to equally weight the performance on a play-by-play basis. And I think this is where like PFF grading can be useful. The PFF grading is not always great from calibrating exactly like what is valuable or not, what is sticky versus what isn't sticky. I mean, famously undervaluing the negative, I guess you could say, of sacks and things like that. But what it does do is it's saying, okay, every play we're going to grade from -2 to 2 on half a point incremental variations. Most of the grading coming between -0.5 and 0.5. You have your big time throws, which are +1 or better. And you have your turnover worthy plays, which are -1 or worse. Now, by doing this on a play-by-play basis and then aggregating it all up and weighing all these plays, taking account for every single play, sometimes you're going to get a final number, which is more of a comprehensive assessment of what happened, as opposed to a lot of stuff we're seeing with Williams here. I mean, maybe there are a lot of people watching his, I think it was 5 drives that he had in this last preseason game, but I doubt it. I bet most people were seeing the escapability out of the pocket and the big throw down the sideline to Roma Dunze that everyone was sharing on social media. People are seeing the scrambling around and then scoring the 7-yard touchdown that we've seen there. People were seeing this little flip pass that he was able to complete in another game here. People are seeing those things. The big throw to Cole Kmet in week 1 of the preseason last week. People are seeing those things over and over and over and over and over again. And maybe they're getting a little bit of a skewed impression that that was the consistent level of play, or that there weren't also some downsides to what was going on. So I'm going to concentrate on the downsides with the caveat that, yes, Williams is playing well. I'm not saying he's playing poorly. It's just, we add a little bit more value here if we're going to contextualize what has happened against what we may think has happened. To be someone who's on, rah, like, oh, look at Williams. Oh, I think they found their guy. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, like everyone's doing that. Okay. You're not adding any value. You're not informing, you're performing, as I like to talk about how people do a lot of their analysis. And whatever. Performance can be fine. Performance can be good sometimes too. But you're not informing anyone that, like, look at this great play by Caleb Williams. He looks like he's great. Not much of you're not informing people a whole lot there. Okay, so let's talk about some of, like, again, why there's a little bit of a disconnect here. And a big reason why there might be a little bit of a disconnect between the numbers-based analysis and the grading for Caleb Williams versus what people's perception is that he had a 3 and out on the first 3 drives in this game. Right? His passing grade for this week that everyone was raving about what he was doing, was a 60.9. So a pretty bad passing grade. He was 6 of 13, under 50% completion. So again, you don't see the incompletions. He had the 2 big time throws though. So that's a fantastic amount of big time throws when we're only talking about 13 pass attempts. And he had the scramble, which was great. Also, when we're only talking about 15 dropbacks. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. But there were also a lot of incompletions. Again, 3 and out on the first 3 drives that we kind of just ignore the fact that happened because of what happened on the final 2 drives where some big plays were being made. Another thing to think about Williams is the sustainability of his style of play so far when it comes to holding the ball. I think he's not completely problematic when it comes to holding the ball, like maybe someone like a Justin Fields is, where when Fields is holding the ball, every so often it's in the service of making a throwing play down the field, but a lot of the time it's just setting up a scramble or a sack or a bad throw. Whereas Caleb Williams, as we saw on the highlights that are being shared, is holding the ball to make plays. And, Josh Allen holds the ball to make plays. Patrick Mahomes holds the ball to make plays. Lamar Jackson sometimes holds the ball to make plays. The difference is if that's properly calibrated so that you're also not taking sacks by holding the ball. So the concern with Williams is, not that he's taking a ton of sacks. I mean, he took a sack in this game where he probably could have got to run the ball, but it wasn't the fastest sort of sack. He didn't take any sacks in the last game. So he hasn't that problem in the short amount of preseason. But if your average time to throw now is 3.7 seconds during the preseason, which is almost half a second longer than the slowest time to throw of Justin Fields last year, it's probably not going to fly. Yeah. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, all these guys hold the ball to make plays. They don't hold it that long on average. So what Caleb Williams saw was he was able to escape and not take sacks on some of these, where I think more of those are going to translate to sacks, or at least a higher percentage are going to translate to sacks during the regular season. And he's been getting really, really good blocking from his offensive line. Now, that's also something that may translate to the regular season. He has a really good surrounding talent around, not only at receiver, but they've built up that offensive line too. However, he's not going to be able to hold the ball as long as he has been doing. And the reason that we're actually concerned about it and not just saying this is a preseason thing, who cares, is that last year, his final season in college, if you take all the top prospects, all the top college prospects, he had the longest time to throw of anyone in that group. And he also had the highest pressure to sack percentage. So it was about 23%. So that how many pressures translate into sacks. Again, this is not something Patrick Mahomes was doing in college. He had a very low number there. He's had an extremely low number in the NFL. Same thing. Josh Allen has a very, very low number in the NFL. You can hold the ball, but it has to be appropriate. Some of the times I saw him on there, some of them look appropriate. Some of them he's escaping in a way that, not sure the sustainability of it. So that would be my concern. I think there are going to be some more sacks during the regular season, more than what we've seen. There could be some ups and downs because of that. But the fact that he is able to make the big plays and the big throws gives him the ceiling. I don't disagree at all with the ceiling assessment there. It's just whether or not on a play-by-play basis he can make the plays that he needs to. And we can't ignore these 3 and outs and these other drives that we saw during the preseason that are getting largely ignored in the analysis. All right, let's go to Jaden Daniels, number 2 overall pick. This one is interesting on the other side when it comes to time to throw. So in this game, remember the first preseason game, he only had 1 drive where he kind of jogged in a read option touchdown. He made a big pass down the sideline, but 1 drive. I think it was 2 or 3 passing on that drive. This one, it was 2 drives, I believe. They gained 108 yards on those 2 drives, so pretty solid there. Yet they ran 19 plays to do so. So that's only a little bit over 5 yards per play. They were able to convert a ton of third downs to get there, but is that sustainable? I don't know. It was a lot of dinking and dunking. And maybe that's okay. Maybe this Cliff Kingsbury offense, we should expect that probably. But is it sustainable? 1.9 seconds for his average time to throw, a 4.4 yard ADOT. Only 1 pass went more than 10 yards downfield. They said they were going to let him do that a little bit more often. Didn't really see that much. 4 screens on 12 dropbacks. They've already run way more screens than anyone else. He took 0 pressures in this game. They got rid of the ball so quickly. It's a good game plan if you have a quarterback where you don't necessarily want to turn it over to them to use their calibration to make some plays. You want them just to get the ball out quickly. I mean, he was 10 of 12 for 78 yards, so very, very high completion percentage, but not a lot of big time throws or anything like that. He had a couple of running plays, 13 yards on 2 carries. So he's doing something there, but they're going to need to open that up a bit more going forward. Maybe it's good to keep him healthy, not to open it up too much early. Maybe it's good to let him get accustomed to the game as things start to go on, but it was pretty low upside from a fantasy perspective. If it was, or also from a real life perspective, one of the more interesting things is how quickly they were running these plays. They were also very often snapping the ball with 15 plus seconds left on the play clock. So again, fast plays, short plays, screen passes, RPOs. Those are the types of plays we're seeing over and over for them. And even when they're successful, it was about 5-yard chunks we're talking about here, which can work for a little while, but eventually you're not gonna convert one of those third downs. but he looked very accurate throwing the ball. So I think that was good. He was throwing darts in a similar. It's very similar in some ways to what we saw with Bo Nix, but Bo Nix was actually moving around quite a bit more and making quite a bit more plays there. But the offense, at least initially, might be more about get the ball into receivers' hands, see if they can run after the catch. I mean, one of the biggest plays they made was to Terry McLaurin, where it was basically a 3-yard out on 3rd and 3, but it was so well placed, he was able to turn and gain another 17 yards for a 20-yard gain. That might just be the offense for the Commanders. We'll see going forward. Jaden Daniels is someone who didn't hold the ball as long as Caleb Williams in college, but he did hold the ball more than 3-second time to throw. He did take sacks at a fairly high level versus pressures. About 20% of pressures translate into sacks. Not quite as high as Caleb Williams, but similar. And he had a ton of scrambles. If you take scrambles and sacks combined, they were something like 20% of dropbacks for him. I'm sorry, something like 30% of dropbacks for him in college last year. I mean, that's a lot. That is a lot. Okay. Let's move on to Drake May. Drake May had a good session there. He was on the box score, didn't look as good as it did from the numbers where you actually grade and look at what's going on. He was 6 of 11 for 47 yards. He was all right. So for Drake May, the number is not great. 6 of 11, 47 yards, 4.3 yards per attempt. 1 sack for 8 yards, 4 carries for 15 yards, although he did have a read option touchdown. So that was okay. The PFF number is a lot better. 2 big time throws. Now, how do you get 4.3 yards per attempt on 2 big time throws? Well, I believe those are both drops or plays where the receiver should have positioned himself a little bit better going down the sideline, and the other was a straight drop on like a 45, 50-yard bomb down the middle. 9.3 ADOT. Again, he played pretty well, but the numbers weren't great. He was pushing the ball down the field. 3-second time to throw. Was that something to worry about? No, it's still lowish enough. I thought he did some good scrambling when he did. There was some play action where he held the ball to, again, throw the ball down the field. I think it was pretty good movement for him. I liked it. 5 pressures. So 5 pressures on what ended up being fewer than 15 dropbacks. That's a lot of pressure. Again, a lot more pressure than someone like Caleb Williams was facing. He did well under those pressures. 2 scrambles, and I think they were good scrambles. The first one, maybe it's a hit he didn't need to take, but generally pretty good. Some contextual stuff for May, while I think he's played better than his number so far this preseason, is 6 drops in the preseason. You got a 15-yard defensive pass interference in this last game, which doesn't count towards the headline box score numbers. He had a decent amount of pressure, which caused quick passes and some of this stuff. So, generally, I thought this was like a really good game for him, though. In this one, he had is in this week. Let me see. What was his grading for this week? Drake May, 81.5 passing grade. Pretty good number. Despite the fact you're saying, oh, he only completed 6 of 11 passes. And, they didn't have the yards per attempt, but there was a lot of good stuff in there that ended up getting lost. Ended up getting lost in some of this stuff. No JJ McCarthy again, RIP, so we won't talk about him. And then lastly, let's talk about Bo Nix. So Bo Nix is someone I want to be higher than the market on, but yet there's at least some segment of the market that's going absolutely crazy. If you go and you put into the Twitter search Bo Nix, you're going to see a bunch of different commentators who are, let's face it, they're looking for engagement a lot of the time, saying like, oh no, he's actually the best quarterback of the draft. He looks amazing. Let's reference the Sean Payton interview where he's discussing why he drafted Bo Nix. This is why he wanted him so badly. we all laughed when he made a comparison to missing out on Patrick Mahomes and then not wanting to miss out on Bo Nix. And, maybe, maybe Peyton's going to get the last laugh there. Although, we'll slow down our Patrick Mahomes comparisons there. So, like, I naturally want to be higher than him there, but I also think people are going overboard. That segment of people are going overboard. I think there's like a reaction to the reaction going on, though, of the film hipster types who are going to watch Caleb Williams and watch Bo Nix, and they're just going to drool for these things that Caleb Williams is able to do with the off platform and that other sort of stuff, creating time and some of these throws down the field. And then they're just going to discount everything Bo Nix does and say, yeah, he's just being a system quarterback, doing a system quarterback things. He's just executing. Like, executing is important. You have to be somewhere in between. You have to recognize the upside that can come with making these plays that other quarterbacks simply can't make. Like, having that in your arsenal, having that arrow in your quiver is important. But being able to execute plays that you should execute is also important. I mean, Jared Goff is getting a $50 million a year, not because he makes the most fantastical plays that a lot of quarterbacks can't make. It's because he's very accurate and he has very strong execution when he needs to execute. And when it comes to Nix, what we're seeing from him more so than what we saw from Jaden Daniels, because of just how the scheme was and getting rid of the ball so quickly, is we're seeing him move around a lot of rolling out, a lot of movement in the pocket, a lot of stepping up and scrambling in a strategic, almost wise sort of way. I mean, one of his scrambles was just basically avoiding a sack, so it was only 1 or 2 yard gain. Another was fairly quickly recognizing the coverage as being man coverage and then scrambling for a first down. So, like, smart sort of stuff. And he hasn't been as good as the results. I mean, this season, if you look at the drives that he's had in the preseason, not counting a very short drive where there's a receiver fumble after completed pass, so we're not going to count that one. For Bo Nix, not counting that drive, it's 6 drives this preseason, where it seems like he's played a lot more than that, but that's because these drives have been very successful and then longer drives. 6 drives, 30 points on those 6 drives. Okay, let's do the quick math on that. That's 5 points per drive. Yeah, that would be leading the NFL, the NFL in efficiency. Okay, if you were to average 5 points per drive for the rest of the season. So extremely good results there so far. Is he as good as these results so far? No. Should we be moving him up and assuming that he is better than one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the league? No. Should we be a little bit more positive on Nix than we were as viewing him as just the number 12 pick? Sure. We should be a little bit more positive. I don't know if you should be a lot more positive. The regular season evidence is going to matter a lot more than what we're seeing in the preseason, but he looks good. He looks functionally mobile. He looks like he doesn't have the strongest arm, but he can throw some darts when it comes to the short passes. In this game, 8 of 9 passing for 98 yards, which is 8.9 yards per attempt, a touchdown, no interceptions. Now, so here's the difference when we're talking about him versus Drake May and Caleb Williams. No big-time throws. We're seeing these kind of big-time throws from others. I'm not going to knock him as hard for that as a lot of the quarterback film hipsters will knock him, but it's something to consider. But also, no turnover-worthy plays, no sacks, 3 scrambles, again, which were well-designed scrambles, 3.2 second time to throw. So he's not just dinking and dunking immediately. He's moving around and making things happen. Also, this wasn't the Jaden Daniels game plan that we saw from Cliff Kingsbury. Now, only 2 of his passes were more than 10 yards down the field. However, both were completed. And I think what you'd also be encouraged by when you're thinking about Bo Nix is you might think, well, he's a little bit on the shorter side, maybe even think that he's shorter than he really is, but he's 6'2". So he's a couple of inches taller than Drew Brees. And he's actually taller than Caleb Williams. You know, I mean, Drake May is 6'4", Jaden Daniels is 6'4", so those are big dudes. He's actually taller than Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams actually has a little bit more issues. Has shown a little bit more issues during college being able to throw over the middle than you'd think. What Drew Brees was always able to do extremely effectively despite his height. And again, there's going to be Drew Brees comparisons. I'm sorry. He's with Sean Payton. We can't help it. They're running the offense. But like the similarities are there in the functional athleticism. Drew Brees is like a very athletic dude, despite the fact that he wasn't like running for scrambling or doing things like that. So having the athleticism and having even a little bit more height than Brees and being able to throw the ball over the middle is important, especially in this system. And that's something that never matched up with like what Russell Wilson was good at as a short passer who couldn't get the ball over the middle. If we chart out some of this stuff for what Nix has been able to do so far this year, by passing depth. If we just look at this last game, actually, let's just look at the last game because I think this is a good illustration of what happened. If we look at pressure and depth for what Bo Nix did during this game, and again, concentrating on what's over the middle. So he was 1 for 1 beyond 20 yards down the field, the 23-yard pass. He was 1 for 1 in the middle of the field for 14 yards. When we're talking about between 10 and 20 yards, and he was 3 for 3 between 0 and 10 yards down the middle of the field. So they actually ended up having 5 different pass attempts in the middle of the field versus only, let's see, this is at least, past the line of scrimmage, versus only 2 pass attempts past the line of scrimmage outside the hash marks. These are very important. If you can execute that, not turn the ball over, it really puts stress on the defense if you can throw between the numbers that well. Again, something Drew Brees would get up on his tippy toes and do really well in this offense. If Bo Nix can do that same thing, there is a lot to be excited about. One other thing to think about when it comes to him is, I think it's a no-brainer that you have to start him at the age that he is. Stidham is been around for a while, hasn't done anything. So that my stance on that hasn't really changed. When it comes to Nix, I just think the functional mobility is going to really help in keeping him healthy in a way if he can be smart about it. Again, it's not big scrambles, it's not read option running plays, but it just opens up the playbook, and we saw that a little bit in what we saw in the preseason. So my overall take on Nix is let's be very positive on him. Let's kind of ignore the hyperbole of those being too positive, but let's also ignore the hating in a way of those being a little bit negative who are reacting to the people being too positive on him. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this somewhat shortened version of the Unexpected Points podcast. I'll be back at you next week when I'm back from vacation. We'll be rolling into the NFL season very soon. The content will be flowing for all the week 1 content that'll be coming out over the next couple of weeks. I appreciate the support from everyone here. We'll have Hermsmeyer back to preview more stuff going to the season rather than just talk about the preseason. And I might do some like quarterback reviewing during the regular season, more comparing maybe general impressions of how well people played with their advanced stats, with the adjustments I make on the advanced stats, with the PFF grading, just to get a better idea, so you have a better contextual idea on how some guys have played so far this year. Like, for instance, really focusing this week on how Caleb Williams was maybe not quite as perfect or solid as some people saw from his numbers. So let me know if you guys would be interested in that. Otherwise, I appreciate you tuning in to this on vacation version of Unexpected Points, and I'll be talking at all of you guys next week. Thanks so much.